welcome to Get Sober With Me, Episode 1. My name's Steve, and I'm your host. Little housekeeping before we get started here. I'd like to thank my good friends John and Jessica Nipper for giving me the encouragement to start this podcast. I'd also like to thank Buzzsprout.com for hosting it. You can visit me on Facebook at Get Sober With Me, also on Instagram and Twitter. A little bit about myself. My name's Steve. I'm a 50-year-old. I'm a recovered alcoholic and addict. I've been in recovery for quite a long time now, although I am coming back off of a 3-year relapse. So as part of my healing process and getting back into life and recovery and everything that I should be doing, I thought I would start this podcast as a way to heal myself, maybe help some others. A little bit about my story. I come from Indianapolis, Indiana. Grew up like a lot of people, divorced parents, lots of different schools, moved around a lot, all that good stuff. We'll start very early in my childhood. When I was in first grade, I watched my dad be arrested by the FBI. He was gone for 18 months. After he got out of prison, he came back, and my mom and dad subsequently divorced at that point. After that, my dad was remarried, and we went to live with him and his new wife. It was me and my one sister at the time. 2 more siblings came along. Dad was really strict back then. My dad sold cars, his entire life and my entire life. So he was gone. He worked 70, 80 hours a week most weeks. But he was very domineering and controlling. When I was a kid, he's since changed, and he's not quite that way as much anymore. And now we get along for a long time. I wanted nothing to do with him. Let me back up. I carried a lot of, for a very long time, I carried a lot of ill will and resentments towards my mom because I felt like she left us because we got sent to live with Dad, and she got married and went to live with her new husband. So I drank around that for a very long time. When I was 14, there was some sexual abuse that started happening in my house with me and my stepmom and my dad involved. And there was a lot of trauma there. I guess to some extent there may still be. So, that all that leads, into what would become the rest of my story. And I would say that went on for a couple of years. Eventually I was moved out of my dad's and stepmom's house and moved in with my mom. So then again, a different high school, different side of Indianapolis, a little more experiences. And it was around this time that I first started to experiment with drinking and drugs, smoking a little bit of weed, did a little bit of cocaine, drank some with some boys in the trailer park, things like that. Eventually, these behaviors and actions would lead me to starting to get bad grades, and they were starting to put me in developmental programs and guidance counselors and things like that. And one day, I blurted out to the guidance counselor what had been happening at home, and of course, that brought on a whole big legal to-do. And eventually, my dad sent me to live in Arizona with an uncle who wasn't really my uncle. That's kind of a long story there. Maybe we can get into that again someday. And from there, he moved us to a town in Big Spring, Texas, where he ultimately abandoned me. So there I was, 16 or 17-year-old in Big Spring, Texas, still trying to go to school. Eventually, the law caught up with me, and they extradited me back to Indianapolis to go to trial against my dad and stepmom. And I think he did a little bit of time and house arrest, and she did some house arrest maybe. And that was really about all that happened there. I would end up back in Big Spring, Texas. for a little while, and then, I would end up overstaying my welcome there. I got arrested on a drug charge there, underage, so it went away when I turned 18. I got caught with a few joints. After that, I ended up in Kentucky with my grandfather, who was my dad's dad. And everything was good for a while there. And then I got a DUI, 19 years old. I got my first real consequences from my drinking and drugging, and got a DUI in Tompkinsville, Kentucky at a Dairy Queen drive-thru. But that wasn't going to stop me from drinking. Eventually, I would steal from my grandpa and forge one of his checks, which led me to running away from there. And I hitchhiked my way to Florida. And I ended up in South Florida at 19 years old with nowhere to go, homeless, didn't know what I was going to do. But, I hooked up with some people and got a room in a house, and things kind of progressed from there. And it would be during this time in my life that I would really start doing a lot of heavy binge drinking, and not so much really every day, but definitely on the weekends, and doing lots and lots of cocaine. It was South Florida, early 90s. It was everywhere and easy to get, and it was cheap. I got a job working for a satellite dish company, and I would ultimately learn to install satellite dishes. So there I was, 19, 20 years old, and back then making, $500-$600 a week. And life seemed to be pretty good, but I was lonely, and I had all this trauma, and that I was still hiding from, and felt responsible for, and basically just drowned in my pain in anything that I could get my hands on, and doing it a lot. I wouldn't get arrested anymore for a while. I ended up back in Indiana for a short time, only to turn around and go right back to Florida, because I just couldn't deal with the mental and emotional turmoil of being around my family back then. So there I was, back in Florida, back to doing satellite dishes and drinking daily. By this time, I'm probably 22 or so years old. I met a lady named Pam at the time. Ended up moving in with her. Things weren't great. She was an unmedicated bipolar, manic depressive, so there was lots of turmoil there, and I really was just seeking, any kind of love that I could get from anybody, and I kind of thought I found it in her, but I really didn't. Of course, a whole lot of that was my fault. I'm selfish and self-centered, and always thinking about me. But we got pregnant with a little girl. Her name was Cheyenne, but Pam would miscarry her at 6.5 months. Shortly after that, we would get pregnant again, only this time with twin boys that she would carry to term. Well, not full term. She had them at 7 months, and they were premature and small and in the hospital. But, they both survived and were healthy. And up to this point, I had only done powder cocaine. I had never done anything else. And Pam introduced me to smoking crack. And that was my downfall. At that point, I knew that because kids were coming, had twin sons, I had to provide. I didn't know what I was going to do. Pam didn't work. I went to truck driving school. And in my own mind, truck driving school was a way to earn a nice living and be able to provide for this wife that I had and these twin children that I had coming. So I went on the road, subsequently leaving her alone with twins. Well, she started getting high while I was out on the road, and I was sending her lots of money. And, then one weekend when I'm home, she introduced me to it. And that would really start my downfall into hard drugs and doing things I shouldn't have been doing. because then as I was out on the road, I found crystal methamphetamine, which helped me stay awake, which helped me drive longer, which helped me, make more money. At least that was the justification in my head. Pam and I were married for 5 years, and around the time the boys were 4 or 5, we both abandoned them, basically. I just disappeared. Pam's parents tried to send her to treatment, and then she disappeared and went to North Carolina, and I started driving a truck, and they went to live with her parents, their grandparents, who would ultimately raise them. And this would send me down a dark, 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 dark hole that I really almost never climbed out of. At that point, there was not much I could do. I got arrested a couple more times for various things. I've lost my driver's license so many times I can't remember, and that's where my story starts to go downhill after that. I eventually stopped driving a truck, and then because I was just getting high all the time. So I was getting high all the time, and, I ended up back in Florida maybe I ended up in Indiana with the guy I was driving a truck for. We moved to Florida, still drinking a lot, not doing any more hard drugs, not smoking crack or doing cocaine. But eventually I would get back down to Destin, Florida, and my hard drug addiction would kick back in, and I would find cocaine and meth down there, and I was doing those, and that kind of separated my relationship with my friend Jimmy at the time. Again, I would get arrested there for bad checks that I had written, things like that. Spent a few days in a jail there, still didn't sober me up. Came back to Indiana. And when I came back to Indiana, my dad wouldn't even let me sleep on the porch. My family didn't want anything to do with me, really. I remember my dad taking me and dropping me off at the homeless shelter in Indianapolis. And so I stayed at the homeless shelter and bounced around, and, I eventually ended up in a 6-month work program for the Salvation Army, which was like a treatment facility. And that was really my first taste at AA and getting treatment and things like that. And I would leave there after completing that program, and I moved into a halfway house, and I think I got maybe 35 days in that halfway house, and then I went and got high again, because I wasn't doing anything other than existing, basically. And right around that time, I left that halfway house, continuing to get high. And then it's probably mid-2006 at this time, my mother died. And I wasn't real close to my mom because, like I said, I had felt that she abandoned me when I was a kid, which is kind of ironic that I did that to my own children. So when she got sick with cancer and she was going to die, it really affected me profoundly, more than I thought it was going to, and it tore me up inside. And really, I jumped off the deep end. And that's really when my addiction started to get its worst. And it would last for, another few years. I'd get in the restaurant industry and start serving so that I had cash every day to support my habit. And then this went on for quite a number of years. Another DUI in 2006. So now I'm on my second DUI. Got through the consequences of that. Still didn't sober me up. I remember getting right out of jail and going and smoking crack and drinking. So, that endless cycle kept going. Sometime in late 2011, early 2012, I went on a big binge, and I stole a bunch of money from somebody and out of their house that I still have never suffered any consequences for, thank God, although I probably should have. I was never caught. And I went on a big crack binge. Ultimately, That would lead me to taking a Xanax to try and come down one day, or a couple of Xanax probably, and I woke up in a park in Nashville, Tennessee, not having any idea how I got here. So my first experience in Nashville, waking up with a Metro Nashville police officer writing me a citation, which is like getting arrested in Nashville. They just don't take you to jail for sleeping in a public park. I would end up at a place called Room in the Inn here in Nashville, and I would stay there and go through treatment there and move into a place called Welcome Home Ministries. It's a recovery house network here in Nashville. And I would stay there for a little bit and go through their program. And I moved to a 3-quarter house. But once again, that was very short-lived as I relapsed again and went and got high. And that would last, a couple more months, or, 6-8 months, whatever. And then I ended up back at Welcome Home Ministries. With the firm, mindset that, okay, this time's going to be different. I'm going to do something different. And then I never did. Only this last time when I went in, I went to Samaritan Recovery Center for treatment. I had started doing heroin before that here in Nashville, which I really liked a lot, I must say, but it also almost killed me. And there were a few times where, I was really, trying to overdose and then just didn't. There would be a lot of, heroin and cocaine and methamphetamine use in the time between. I ultimately ended up back at Welcome Home Ministries, where a gentleman named Dennis was the house manager, and he happened to be a restaurant general manager at a place called Jason's Deli. And he would offer me a job, and I had no driver's license. I had no car. I was riding the bus, and I would go to work for Jason's Deli as, bussing tables and running food, 40 years old, however old I was at the time. And I would move up and really start to get my life together. And so for the next 4 or 5 years, I progressed through Jason's Deli and have ultimately met, some very close friends of mine now. I mentioned them at the very beginning of this podcast, John and Jessica Nipper. At the time, they were just boyfriend and girlfriend. Jessica was a manager at Jason's Deli. She ultimately became a general manager and asked for me to come work in her store at a different location. And her and I became friends. And ultimately, I would move in they would buy a house and I would move in and be their roommate. And all was well for a time, but on the outside. But on the inside, I was still horribly messed up, still full of fear and anger and hurt and disappointment, and hated myself. And I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. And I just got to a point where, again, only I wasn't drinking or drugging or anything like that. And then eventually, I was going to meetings and I had a sponsor and things like that for all those years. And I made a lot of friends in recovery here in Nashville, because Nashville has a wonderful recovery community. And all would be well for a time. And then I got the idea that if I just drank a little bit, I'd be okay. Or smoked a little bit of weed, I'd be okay. And really, that is not the case. On August the 26th of 2019, one of my twin sons, Trevor, was murdered in Indianapolis, and he was burned up on the 26th of August. On September the 11th, 2019, he died of those injuries. And it was then that I would jump off the deep end. I immediately went and bought some crystal methamphetamine and started shooting it up. I was shooting it up in Jessica and Jonathan Nipper's house, with absolutely no thought that they're married now. They have a 1-year-old baby, who I love. I still love her to this day. Now she's 4 and she's amazing and she's this awesome little person. And I just can't get enough of her. But back then, even loving her, wasn't enough. Just like loving my own children wasn't enough to keep me sober. So they would throw me out of their house, as they should. And I would move back into a recovery house, purely for the lack of I didn't have anywhere to go. At the time I had a driver's license and a car and, I had a few things, but not a lot. And I would move into a recovery house. And then COVID hit. And I decided, well, I'm going to go see my dad in Florida. And I went to see my dad down in Okeechobee, Florida. And ultimately, the thought started rolling, well, if I come to Florida, I can drink all I want. My dad's not going to say anything. And he didn't. And so I moved to Florida and ultimately started drinking a lot more. And I would drink every day to excess until I passed out, and I'd get up and I would do that again as I wasn't working. I was delivering groceries for Instacart at the time, making just a little bit of money, enough money to pay for beer and cigarettes. Dad was supplying all the food and a place to live. And at the time I still had a nice car, a Dodge Challenger, and I joined a car club up down there trying to get, some social interaction that didn't revolve around me sitting at my dad's house drinking alone every day. So then I met a girl, ran off to the other coast, basically forced myself into her life. And ultimately, right before I met her, I got a DUI in Florida. So there I lost my license again. I don't have it to this day yet. So I met this lady, and she drinks a lot. She drinks more than I did, and I drink a lot, and that, that's saying something. So it was the perfect combination of great. Here I can drink and I can party with this lady and have fun, and it's totally accepted. But it was a bad combination, us drinking together. So I would live with her for the next 2 years or so until our relationship, just got very, very toxic. I put my hands on a woman for the first time in my life while I was drunk, which really scared me, that I didn't even know I had that in me. So I was very scared of that. Ultimately, I did not complete what I was supposed to for my DUI probation in Florida, and I went to jail for 45 days. After getting out of jail and coming back home, my relationship with this woman was very strained. And then she got sick and went in the hospital. And I don't know what happened there, but one day during the hospital, again, you got to realize I'm drinking every day. I'm drinking a lot every day. And one evening about, I'm pretty lit. I get in her car because mine had been wrecked in an accident that was not of my fault and totaled, so I lost my car. But I would get in one of her cars, and I would drive up to Sarasota, and I would buy some drugs, and I would go on a 3 or 4 day binge in her stolen car. Luckily, her daughter tracked me down through Find My iPhone app, and she would ultimately come and rescue me, is what she did. And so for the next 7 or 8 months, I lived with her daughter. But then again, I was drinking still every day. Her daughter and her boyfriend would move out and move in with her mom and her grandparents, and leaving me at the house alone, the apartment that, but no way to pay for it or anything. Still drinking every day. And then one morning, right before Thanksgiving, I woke up and I wasn't really hungover, but mentally I just didn't feel well. And I just knew it was time. I had to go get some help. I had to do something. So I called a friend of mine here in Nashville, Justin Coggins. He owns a Design for Living recovery homes here in Nashville. And I've known Justin since he got sober. So I called him up and told him, look, I'm leaving Florida. I'm coming back to Nashville, and I'm going to get sober. I need a bed. And all he said was, okay, when are you coming? So on December the 2nd, the girl from Florida, whose name I really don't want to mention, her daughter, Alyssa, bought me a plane ticket to get up here. And I flew into Nashville on December the 2nd of this year, of 2022. I spent 2 days with my friends John and Jessica Nipper, and I moved into a Design for Living on December the 4th, 2022. It's now January the 29th, 2023, so I'm, about 65 or 66 days sober at the time of this podcast. And somehow I don't know what put it on my heart to share my story like this. And of course, in later episodes, I hope to get into a little more in depth about some of the trauma in my life and how I felt around those things, and maybe, through some prayer and sponsorship and things like that, I can kind of recall that stuff in my memory that I can share with you guys, because I want to be as open and as honest and forthright with everyone as I can be. So here at 65 days sober, I've managed to find a job, get a sponsor, started working the steps. Obviously I'm step one. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol and drugs, and that our lives are unmanageable. It's super easy for me to look back over my history and see the powerlessness of alcohol and drugs on me and the unmanageability of my life. Step two, came to believe that a power greater than me could restore me to sanity. Do I believe in God? It's something I had to sit down and really ask myself. And the answer to that question is unequivocally yes, I do. And then, made a decision to turn my will and life over to the care of God as I understand Him. And as I understand God, God loves me. Why would He keep me, on this earth all this time if He didn't? And then, of course, I wrote a 4-step. I made a searching, fearless moral inventory of myself, and I wrote down all my character defects and all that good stuff, and I shared it with a sponsor, and I started going to meetings. And, when I feel better today. Am I well? No. I am, taking some medicine. I managed to get into a doctor and got diagnosed. I suffer with some pretty severe depression, where I just want to lay in bed and do nothing. And it's not a lazy, because I'm not a lazy person. It's a physical, I can't get out of bed type of deal. And so, now I'm on some meds to help take care of that, which is a great thing. I'm starting to feel better. Work's going good. I started working through an app called InstaWork. Shout out to InstaWork. If you guys don't know what it is, reach out to me. I'll give you a link to get signed up. It's kind of a day labor thing, but it's really cool. And I have managed to work my way into a full-time job with InstaWork. And, it's not the kind of money I used to make when I managed restaurants, but it's doing me okay today. And I'm really thankful. It's quite humbling. So I'm in Nashville. Like I said, no car, no driver's license. I got, just barely a few clothes, what I can carry. Luckily, my friends John and Jessica, they hooked me up with some clothes and gave me some bed sheets and things like that and comforters. So I have everything I need right now. And all I can say is that I know that is God taking care of me. And I'm very, very thankful for that. And we're going to get into, steps and step work and what it feels like and all that in future episodes. Now, like I said, I just wanted to go ahead and share part of my story with you guys today on this episode and kind of get you introduced to me. And if this sounds choppy or funky or whatever, you guys got to bear with me. It's just my first time ever trying this. I bought a little cheap microphone that was recommended off of Amazon and a little mic stand, and I got my little laptop here that I didn't lose in my addiction, and I got the mic hooked to a TV tray sitting next to my bed in a halfway house as I record this podcast. And, I have no expectations of what this might be or what it can be. I just want to express myself and get myself out there. And hopefully I can help somebody and touch someone and they'll understand what I'm talking about. And they'll reach out, and you guys will like and comment and follow and reach out to me. Again, you can find me on Facebook at Get Sober With Me, You can find me on Instagram at Get Sober With Me and on Twitter at Get Sober With Me. So please reach out, visit the website, buzzsprout.com/Get Sober With Me also. Thanks for listening, and I hope everybody has a great week. We might upload a midweek episode here this week if I feel good about it. If not, I'll catch you guys next Sunday. Thank you so much.